Mira clutched her swollen belly as another wave of pain crashed through her body. The small mud hut felt suffocating in the scorching Indian summer heat. Outside, she could hear the whispered conversations of the village women, their voices carrying judgment and disappointment. In their traditional society, giving birth to daughters was considered a burden, and twins made it twice as shameful. Her mother-in-law, Kamala, paced nervously in the corner, muttering prayers under her breath. "Please let at least one be a son," she whispered to the clay idol of Ganesha. The family had already spent their meager savings on rituals and offerings, hoping to ensure a male heir who would carry forward the family name and take care of them in old age. When the midwife finally emerged from the birthing room, her face told the story before her words could. She shook her head slowly, avoiding eye contact with the gathered family members. "Two healthy babies," she announced quietly. "Both girls." The silence that followed was deafening. Mira's husband, Raj, turned away in disappointment, his shoulders sagging under the weight of social expectations. His father spat on the ground and walked away without a word. The shame was overwhelming. Not only had they failed to produce a son, but now they had two more mouths to feed and two dowries to arrange in the future. Kamala's reaction was swift and harsh. She declared that the family could not afford to keep both children. In their poverty-stricken village, such decisions were not uncommon, though they were never spoken about openly. The community's unspoken rule was clear. Families struggling to survive had to make impossible choices. As news of the twin daughters spread through the village, neighbors began avoiding the family. Some whispered that it was bad karma. Others suggested it was punishment for past sins. The local priest even refused to perform the naming ceremony, claiming the birth was inauspicious. Mira felt completely isolated, carrying the weight of disappointment and shame while trying to care for her newborn daughters. The babies, however, were beautiful and healthy. They had bright eyes that seemed to take in everything around them, and despite the circumstances of their birth, they brought moments of joy to their mother's troubled heart. Mira named them Priya and Kavya in the quiet of her room, away from the disapproving eyes of her family. Days passed in a blur of tension and whispered arguments. The family held urgent meetings to discuss their options, none of which seemed acceptable to Mira. She overheard conversations about giving one child away, or worse, abandoning both at a distant temple. The pressure was mounting, and Mira knew that time was running out. Her husband had grown distant and cold, barely looking at her or the babies. The financial strain was evident. They could barely afford to feed themselves, let alone support two additional family members. Raj spent his days working in the fields of wealthy landowners, earning just enough to buy rice and dal for dinner. The village's judgment was relentless. Women who had once been friends now crossed the street to avoid Mira. Children pointed and whispered when she walked by. Even the local shopkeeper treated her with disdain, making it clear that her family's reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. One evening, as Mira sat feeding her daughters, she overheard her mother-in-law talking to a neighbor about a family in the next village who might take one of the babies. The conversation was clinical and cold, treating her children like unwanted possessions to be disposed of. That night, Mira made a desperate decision. She would take her daughters and leave, even if it meant facing an uncertain future alone. She began secretly packing a small bag, gathering what little she could carry. Her plan was to walk to the nearest town and seek work as a domestic helper, hoping someone would show mercy to a mother with twin babies. It was a dangerous gamble, but staying meant watching her family tear her children away from her. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to their village. A tall man with weathered skin and kind eyes rode in on horseback, asking directions to the local market. He was clearly not from their region. His clothes were different, and he spoke with an accent that suggested he had traveled far. This stranger would soon change everything, though none of them knew it yet. The stranger introduced himself as Thomas Harrison, a cattle rancher from Texas who had come to India on business. He was in the region to purchase a specific breed of cattle known for their resilience in harsh climates. His translator had fallen ill, leaving him to navigate the local markets and villages on his own, relying on basic phrases he had learned and the kindness of strangers. Thomas noticed the tension in the village immediately. He had traveled extensively and had developed a keen sense for reading social dynamics. The way people avoided certain houses, the hushed conversations that stopped when he passed by. It all felt familiar to him from his experiences in small rural communities around the world. When he stopped at the village tea stall for refreshments, he couldn't help but overhear the heated discussion between several men. Though he didn't understand most of the words, the emotion was universal. One man was gesturing angrily toward a small house at the edge of the village, while others shook their heads in disapproval. The tea seller, noticing Thomas's curiosity, explained in broken English that a family was facing shame because of twin daughters. Thomas was puzzled by this explanation. In his world, children were blessings regardless of their gender. He had grown up with 3 sisters who were every bit as capable as he was, and his own ranch back in Texas was successfully managed by his daughter Sarah after his wife's death. The concept of shame associated with female births was completely foreign to his understanding. Curiosity led him to observe the house more closely. He saw a young woman, barely more than a girl herself, sitting in the doorway with 2 tiny babies. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked utterly defeated. The scene reminded him of a wounded animal he had once found on his ranch, helpless and abandoned, but still fighting to protect its young. That evening, Thomas approached the village elder to better understand the situation. Through a combination of gestures, his limited Hindi vocabulary, and the elder's basic English, he learned about Mira's predicament. The elder explained that the family was poor, had expected a son, and now faced the impossible burden of raising 2 daughters. The shame was not just social but economic. They simply couldn't afford to keep both children. Thomas spent a sleepless night thinking about what he had learned. He remembered his own struggles as a young rancher, the times when neighbors had helped him through difficult seasons, and how his community had rallied around families in need. He also thought about his late wife, Margaret, who had always said that true strength was measured by how people treated those who couldn't help themselves. The next morning, he made an unconventional decision. He sought out Raj, Mira's husband, and asked to speak with the family. The conversation was difficult due to the language barrier, but Thomas managed to convey his interest in helping. Initially, the family was suspicious. Why would a foreign stranger care about their problems? Thomas explained through gestures and simple words that he had no sons to inherit his ranch. He had money, resources, and no one to pass them to. He had been thinking about this problem for years, especially after his daughter had married and moved to California with her husband. His proposal was unprecedented and shocking. He wanted to adopt both girls and take them back to America, where they would have opportunities that didn't exist in their current situation. The family's initial reaction was a mixture of confusion, suspicion, and desperate hope. Kamala worried about losing her son's children to a foreign land and foreign customs. Raj was torn between his practical concerns about money and his paternal instincts. Mira, however, saw something in Thomas's eyes that she recognized: genuine compassion and sincerity. Thomas spent several days in the village, learning more about the family and allowing them to get to know him. He showed them photographs of his ranch, his home, and his life in Texas. He explained that the girls would receive education, health care, and opportunities that would be impossible for them in their current circumstances. More importantly, they would grow up in a place where their gender would be seen as a strength, not a burden. The village was divided in their opinions about this unusual proposal. Some saw it as the perfect solution to an impossible problem, while others worried about the spiritual and cultural implications of sending the children so far away. The local priest was consulted, village meetings were held, and everyone had an opinion about what should be done. During this time, Thomas spent hours with Mira and her daughters. He was gentle with the babies, and Mira could see that his offer came from a place of genuine care rather than pity or obligation. She began to imagine a different future for Priya and Kavya, one where they could become anything they wanted to be, where their worth wouldn't be measured by their ability to bear sons or their family's ability to pay dowries. The decision would not be easy, and the implications would ripple through their small community for years to come. But sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with the most unexpected encounters between strangers who find common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. After a week of intense discussions and soul-searching, the family reached their decision. Mira's heart was breaking, but her mind was clear. This was the only way to give her daughters a real chance at life. Raj had initially resisted, but the reality of their financial situation and the social pressure from the community made it impossible to ignore Thomas's offer. Kamala, despite her reservations about foreign customs, could see that her granddaughters would face a lifetime of hardship if they remained. The legal process was complex and required trips to the regional government offices. Thomas hired a local lawyer who specialized in international adoptions, and together they navigated the bureaucratic maze of paperwork, background checks, and court appearances. The Indian authorities were thorough in their investigation, wanting to ensure that the children would be safe and well cared for in their new home. During this waiting period, Thomas made several trips back and forth between the village and the city, each time bringing gifts and supplies for the family. He purchased a small plot of land for Raj to farm, ensuring that the family would have some financial stability after the girls left. He also arranged for medical care for Mira, who had been weakened by childbirth and the stress of the situation. The village dynamics began to shift as people witnessed Thomas's genuine commitment to the family's welfare. Some villagers who had previously shunned Mira started to view the situation differently. They began to see the adoption not as an abandonment, but as an incredible opportunity. Word spread to neighboring villages about the American rancher who had chosen to adopt twin Indian daughters, and the story took on almost mythical proportions. Mira used these final weeks with her daughters to create memories she could carry forever. She sang traditional lullabies, told them stories about their heritage, and whispered promises that they would always be loved. Thomas encouraged these bonding moments, understanding that the girls would need these early connections to their birth culture as they grew up in America. The rancher also began learning about Indian customs and traditions. He purchased books, spoke with local scholars, and even started learning Hindi phrases. He wanted to ensure that Priya and Kavya would grow up understanding their roots and feeling proud of their heritage. He promised Mira that he would tell them stories about their brave birth parents and the village where they were born. As the legal proceedings neared completion, Thomas faced his own emotional challenges. He was about to become the father of twin infants at the age of 58, and he would be raising them alone. His daughter Sarah, when he called her from the city, was initially shocked but quickly became supportive. She began preparing the ranch house for the arrival of two baby girls, setting up nurseries and researching Indian cultural traditions to incorporate into their upbringing. The final court hearing was emotionally charged. Mira had to formally relinquish her parental rights, a process that required her to state clearly that she was giving up her children voluntarily and in their best interests. The judge, a stern woman who had handled many difficult cases, was moved by the unusual circumstances and Thomas's obvious dedication to providing a good home for the girls. On the day of departure, the entire village gathered to bid farewell to the twins. It was an unprecedented event. Never before had children from their small community left for a foreign country. Some people brought small gifts, others offered blessings, and many simply came to witness this historic moment. Even those who had initially criticized the family now offered their support and best wishes. Mira dressed her daughters in matching white outfits embroidered with traditional Indian patterns. She placed tiny gold bangles on their wrists and bindis on their foreheads, symbols of their cultural identity that she hoped they would treasure as they grew older. Thomas watched respectfully as she performed these rituals, understanding their deep significance. The goodbye was heartbreaking, yet hopeful. Mira held each daughter one last time, whispering words of love and blessing in their ears. She gave Thomas a small cloth bag containing soil from their village, asking him to keep it so the girls would always have a piece of their birthplace with them. She also included a handwritten letter for each daughter to read when they were old enough to understand their story. As the jeep pulled away from the village, carrying Thomas and the twin babies toward their new life, Mira stood in the doorway watching until they disappeared from sight. The villagers slowly dispersed, each carrying their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. Some whispered that it was the end of a sad chapter, while others believed it was the beginning of an extraordinary story. Raj put his arm around his wife's shoulders as they walked back into their empty house. The silence was deafening, but for the first time in weeks it wasn't filled with shame or judgment. Instead, there was a strange sense of peace, knowing that their daughters were beginning a journey that would take them far beyond the limitations of their birth circumstances. Neither parent could imagine the remarkable future that awaited Priya and Kavya in the vast ranches of Texas, where their story would continue in ways no one could have predicted. The journey to Texas was an adventure filled with challenges and wonder. Thomas had never traveled internationally with infants, and the long flights tested his patience and resourcefulness. Priya cried frequently during the flight changes, while Kavya seemed fascinated by the airplane windows and the changing landscapes below. Fellow passengers and flight attendants helped when they could, moved by the sight of the weathered rancher carefully tending to two tiny Indian babies. Arriving at the ranch was like entering a different world entirely. The sprawling property stretched for miles under the enormous Texas sky, with rolling hills dotted with cattle and horses. Sarah had transformed 2 spare bedrooms into beautiful nurseries, complete with mobiles featuring both American and Indian motifs. She had researched Indian parenting practices and stocked up on appropriate foods, clothes, and toys. The first few months were exhausting but rewarding. Thomas hired a local nanny, Maria, who had experience with infants and spoke both English and Spanish. She quickly became attached to the girls and helped Thomas navigate the sleepless nights and constant feedings. The ranch hands, initially surprised by their boss's sudden fatherhood, soon became protective uncles to Priya and Kavya. As the twins grew into toddlers, their distinct personalities began to emerge. Priya was bold and adventurous, always trying to climb out of her crib and explore every corner of the ranch. She seemed drawn to the horses and would squeal with delight whenever Thomas carried her to the stables. Kavya was more contemplative and gentle, preferring to sit quietly and observe the world around her. She loved music and would calm down instantly whenever Thomas played his old guitar. Thomas made sure to honor his promise to Mira about preserving the girls' cultural heritage. He hired a retired university professor, Dr. Patel, who lived in nearby Austin, to teach them Hindi and tell them stories about Indian history and traditions. Every year on their birthday, he organized a small celebration that included Indian food, music, and decorations. He displayed their adoption papers and photographs from India prominently in their rooms, never hiding the story of their origins. The local community in their small Texas town was initially curious about the unusual family composition, but they quickly accepted and embraced the girls. The ranch had been a fixture in the community for decades, and Thomas's reputation for fairness and kindness extended to how people viewed his daughters. Priya and Kavya became the only Indian children in their school, but they were welcomed and included in all activities. Education was a priority that Thomas took seriously. He enrolled them in the best local schools and supplemented their learning with private tutors. Both girls excelled academically, but in different areas. Priya showed an aptitude for mathematics and science, while Kavya gravitated toward literature and languages. By age 10, they were both fluent in English, conversational in Hindi, and Kavya had also picked up Spanish from Maria. The ranch provided countless learning opportunities that shaped their character. They learned to ride horses, care for animals, and understand the business of cattle ranching. Thomas taught them about responsibility, hard work, and the importance of treating everyone with respect regardless of their background. The girls helped with ranch chores appropriate for their age, learning valuable life skills along the way. When they turned 12, Thomas felt they were ready to learn more about their adoption story. He sat them down in his study and shared the letters their birth mother had written. He explained the circumstances of their birth, the poverty and social pressures their biological parents had faced, and the difficult decision to give them up for adoption. He was honest about the cultural attitudes toward daughters in some parts of India, while being careful not to paint their heritage in a negative light. Both girls had different reactions to this revelation. Priya was angry at first, feeling abandoned and questioning why their birth parents hadn't fought harder to keep them. She struggled with identity issues, feeling caught between two cultures and unsure where she truly belonged. Kavya, on the other hand, was filled with gratitude for the sacrifice their birth parents had made and curiosity about the country and family they had left behind. Thomas handled their emotional responses with patience and wisdom. He arranged for counseling sessions with a therapist who specialized in adoption issues, particularly international adoptions. He also increased their cultural education, bringing in more resources about Indian history, philosophy, and contemporary life. He wanted them to develop pride in their heritage rather than resentment about their circumstances. The girls began to express interest in visiting India, and Thomas started planning for that possibility. He had maintained sporadic contact with the lawyer who had handled their adoption, receiving occasional updates about their birth family. Raj had used the land Thomas purchased to build a modest but sustainable farming operation, and Mira had given birth to a son 2 years after the twins left, which had restored the family's standing in their community. As Priya and Kavya entered their teenage years, they had grown into confident, capable young women who embodied the best of both cultures. They could discuss American politics and Indian classical music with equal enthusiasm. They were popular at school, excelled in their studies, and had developed a strong sense of social justice that would soon drive them toward purposes neither Thomas nor their birth parents could have imagined. The ranch had become more than their home. It was the foundation from which they would launch into the world, carrying with them the love of multiple families, the wisdom of diverse cultures, and the confidence that comes from knowing you are valued simply for who you are, not for meeting anyone else's expectations. At 16, Priya and Kavya had become remarkable young women who defied every stereotype about unwanted daughters. Priya had grown into a natural leader, serving as student body president and captain of the debate team. Her passion for social justice led her to organize fundraising drives for international charities, including organizations that work to improve conditions for women and children in rural India. She had inherited Thomas's practical problem-solving abilities and combined them with a fierce determination to make the world more equitable. Kavya had developed into a gifted writer and artist, with several of her poems published in national youth magazines. She spent hours documenting the stories of the ranch workers, many of whom were immigrants with fascinating backgrounds. Her artistic work often explored themes of identity, belonging, and the complex beauty of living between cultures. She had a gentle but persistent way of challenging people's assumptions and expanding their perspectives. Their academic achievements attracted attention from prestigious universities across the country. Priya received early admission offers to MIT and Stanford for engineering, while Kavya was courted by Columbia and Yale for their creative writing programs. Thomas was proud but also concerned about them leaving the ranch that had been their sanctuary and foundation. The summer before their senior year brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Dr. Patel, their Hindi tutor, arrived with a woman named Indira Sharma, a documentary filmmaker from Mumbai, who was working on a project about international adoptions. She had heard about the twins through academic networks and wanted to interview them about their experiences growing up between two cultures. Indira was fascinated by their story and spent several weeks at the ranch, filming interviews with Thomas, the girls, and members of their community. Her presence sparked deeper conversations about identity, privilege, and purpose. She shared stories about contemporary India, including the changing attitudes toward daughters and the emerging women's rights movement. She also brought news about their birth village, where educational opportunities for girls had slowly begun to improve. During one of these conversations, Kavya expressed a desire to use her writing to tell stories about girls like them, daughters who had been undervalued by their societies, but had found ways to thrive. Priya, meanwhile, became increasingly interested in developing technologies that could improve life in rural communities, particularly for women and children. Their individual passions were beginning to crystallize into concrete life purposes. The documentary filming process also revealed how much they had influenced their Texas community. Teachers, classmates, and neighbors spoke about how the twins had broadened their understanding of the world. Their presence had made the small town more cosmopolitan and accepting of diversity. Several families had been inspired to learn about other cultures, and the high school had introduced new courses in world history and comparative religion. Thomas realized that his daughters were ready for their next chapter, but he also understood that their impact would extend far beyond personal achievement. They had become bridges between cultures, living examples of what was possible when children were valued and nurtured regardless of the circumstances of their birth. As their senior year progressed, the twins made their college decisions. Priya chose MIT for its engineering program, but also because of its proximity to organizations working on global development projects. Kavya selected Columbia, drawn by its journalism school and its location in New York, where she could connect with international media organizations. Both choices reflected their desire to use their educations to make broader impacts on the world. Their graduation was a celebration unlike anything the small Texas town had ever seen. Mira and Raj, now prosperous enough to travel thanks to Thomas's ongoing support, made the journey to America for the ceremony. It was the first time they had seen their daughter since giving them up 18 years earlier. The reunion was emotional and complex, filled with joy, grief, gratitude, and amazement at the remarkable women their babies had become. Mira could barely recognize the confident, articulate young women as the tiny infants she had kissed goodbye so many years ago. She saw Thomas's influence in their mannerisms and values, but she also recognized traces of herself and Raj in their features and expressions. The meeting affirmed her belief that she had made the right decision, even as it reopened old wounds about what she had sacrificed. Raj was overwhelmed by their achievements and their fluency in Hindi, which they used to communicate with him directly. He learned about their plans for college and their ambitions to work internationally. For the first time, he truly understood that daughters could carry a family's legacy just as effectively as sons, perhaps even more so. The graduation ceremony itself became a symbol of possibility for the entire community. The valedictorian speech, delivered jointly by both twins, spoke about the power of communities to transform individual lives and the responsibility of privileged individuals to extend opportunities to others. They announced their intention to establish a scholarship fund for young women from rural communities around the world to pursue higher education. Local news stations covered the story, and it quickly gained national attention. The narrative of twin daughters who went from being shameful burdens to accomplished scholars resonated with audiences across cultural boundaries. Interview requests poured in, and the girls found themselves with a platform to advocate for issues they cared about. As they prepared to leave for college, Priya and Kavya knew they were carrying more than their own dreams. They represented the hopes of countless other daughters who had been undervalued, the love of multiple families who had invested in their success, and the potential for positive change that emerges when societies begin to recognize the full worth of every child. Their journey was far from over, but they had already proven that destinies could be rewritten when circumstances aligned with courage, compassion, and unwavering belief in human potential. 5 years after graduating from college, Priya and Kavya had exceeded every expectation anyone could have imagined for the twin daughters, who were once considered shameful burdens. Their paths had diverged geographically but remained connected in purpose, creating ripple effects that reached back to their origins and forward into an inspiring future. Priya had completed her engineering degree at MIT and earned a master's in sustainable development from Cambridge University in England. She now worked for an international nonprofit organization, designing clean water systems and renewable energy solutions for rural communities across Asia and Africa. Her projects had brought electricity to dozens of villages and clean drinking water to thousands of families. Her expertise was sought after by the United Nations, and she had become one of the youngest technical advisors to speak at international development conferences. Her work had taken her back to India multiple times, where she had reconnected with her birth parents and witnessed the transformation of their village. The scholarship fund she and Kavya had established was now supporting 47 girls from rural Indian communities in their pursuit of higher education. 3 of these young women were from her own birth village, including the daughter of the midwife who had delivered her and Kavya 18 years earlier. Kavya had pursued journalism at Columbia and later earned a fellowship to study documentary filmmaking in London. Her writing had appeared in major international publications, focusing on stories of women and children who had overcome difficult circumstances. Her first book, Daughters of Two Worlds, had become a bestseller and was being translated into 12 languages. The book wove together her own story with those of other internationally adopted children, exploring themes of identity, belonging, and the complex nature of family. Her most recent project was a documentary series about changing attitudes toward daughters in traditional societies around the world. She had interviewed families in India, China, parts of Africa, and rural communities in various countries where gender preferences had historically disadvantaged girls. The series was set to premiere on a major streaming platform and had already generated significant buzz in film festival circuits. Both twins had remained close to Thomas, now in his 70s but still actively managing his ranch. They returned to Texas every Christmas and for his birthday, treating the ranch as their permanent home base even as their work took them around the world. Thomas had become something of a local celebrity, frequently invited to speak about international adoption and cultural integration. He had used his platform to encourage other families to consider adopting children from different cultural backgrounds. The ranch itself had evolved into an informal cultural center for the region. Thomas had converted one of the barns into a library and meeting space where Dr. Patel now taught Hindi and Indian culture classes to interested community members. The annual birthday celebration for Priya and Kavya had grown into a multicultural festival that attracted visitors from across Texas, featuring food, music, and traditions from various cultures represented in their community. Meera and Raj had visited Texas twice more since graduation and had developed a genuine friendship with Thomas. Their son, now 15, was planning to attend college in America with support from the scholarship fund his sisters had created. The relationship between the birth parents and adoptive father had evolved into something unprecedented. The extended family bound not by blood or law, but by shared love for two remarkable young women and mutual respect for the sacrifices each had made. The original village where Priya and Kavya were born had become a symbol of changing attitudes toward daughters throughout the region. Local leaders now spoke proudly of their daughters who had achieved international recognition. The village school, upgraded with funding partially provided by the Twins Scholarship Foundation, now enrolled equal numbers of boys and girls. Young couples in the village were no longer devastated by the birth of daughters, and several families had named their daughters Priya or Kavya in honor of the twins. The broader impact of their story continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The documentary that Indira Sharma had made about their adolescence had won several international awards and was now used in university courses studying adoption, cultural identity, and social change. Marriage and family counselors showed it to clients struggling with cross-cultural relationships, and it had become required viewing for social workers involved in international adoption cases. On their 24th birthday, Priya and Kavya announced their most ambitious project yet. They were establishing an international foundation dedicated to supporting education and opportunity for daughters in traditional societies where gender preference remained a challenge. The foundation would provide scholarships, fund schools, support women's rights organizations, and work to change laws and attitudes that disadvantaged girls. The announcement was made simultaneously from 3 locations. Priya spoke via video conference from a village in Kenya where she was installing solar panels. Kavya addressed the audience from the United Nations headquarters in New York, where she was covering a women's rights summit. And Thomas spoke on their behalf from the ranch in Texas where the foundation's American headquarters would be located. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew their story. 2 daughters who had once been seen as burdens too heavy for their family to bear had grown up to dedicate their lives to ensuring that no other daughters would be similarly undervalued. They had transformed the shame of their birth into a source of strength and purpose that was now touching lives across continents. As the celebration concluded and guests departed from the ranch, Thomas sat on his porch looking out over the land that had been home to so many dreams fulfilled. He thought about the scared young woman he had met in an Indian village so many years ago, clutching her newborn daughters and facing an impossible choice. He wondered if Meera could have imagined that her act of love would eventually create a foundation dedicated to empowering daughters around the world. The stars were bright in the Texas sky, the same stars that shone over the village in India, where this extraordinary story began. 2 little girls who had once represented shame and burden were now beacons of hope and possibility, proving that when society's lowest expectations meet unwavering love and opportunity, destinies can be rewritten in ways that no one could ever predict.